Gambit Chads, welcome to a video that I have had a lot of requests to make, and as soon as this game was played, I knew I would have to make this video. I'm sorry it took me this long, but this is shout out to Praggnanandhaa, who at the highest level of chess, at the biggest tournament of his life, the 16-year-old from India, in the candidates tournament against Vidit Gujrathi, his countryman from India, whips out the Deferred Schliemann Gambit. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Praggnanandhaa has the black pieces, Bishop to B5, we're going into the very common Ruy Lopez variation, super common, we know what we're going to get, we've seen this a million times, Knight F6 coming, a million moves of theory, blah blah blah. But no, Praggnanandhaa puts on the Gambit glasses, F5 in this position. What is happening? He actually, spoiler, you see it here with the 1 with the 0, he wins this game in the tournament, in the candidates tournament with the black pieces against Vidit Gujrathi, who made the candidates tournament in his own right and had a very, very exciting tournament himself. Okay, what is going on with the Schliemann Gambit? I am going to cover all these variations. There's so much I want to cover. They're so exciting. I had to cut down as much as possible, but probably still going to be a long video because I want to compare this position to this position, and the differences are so subtle yet so important, and it's why Vidit got tripped up in this opening, and it's I think a pretty secret weapon that I think a lot of you guys can utilize as well. So with F5 here, we are going to cover pawn takes F5, we're going to cover D3, we're going to cover Knight C3, the two notable ways to decline the gambit that are both considered to be quite good, and we're going to cover D4, the strike back that Vidit used in the game, and we're going to compare them in the position after A6 and in the position without A6. And this is going to be very important stuff, and we'll see why Vidit had no option but to go right into the deep dark forest. There was really no clean, simple option that he could have chosen, and it's why the game got so sharp so quickly, and Praggnanandhaa certainly had the advantage of preparation, both in terms of knowing what to do, understanding the position, being ready for the fight, and he gained a very substantial time advantage in this game, as we will see. Okay, with F5, with the Schliemann Gambit, what is going on? So it is a little like King's Gambit-esque, and the point is that you can't really take this pawn in either position, whether the bishop is here or here. I'll check them both, but it has nothing to do with d6 or d5 right away, as much as you'd like to take the whole center and just grab this pawn back, but the very best move here is e4, and that leaves this knight without a square, because the queen's going to be covering these two squares, and the knight is covering these two squares. So this knight would have to jump back to g1, after which, even better than d5 in this position, is queen g5, attacking g2, attacking f5. This is very uncomfortable for white. After something like g3 or king to f1, you can even play d5, get the pawn back a number of ways. Black is doing great. Bishop takes c6 doesn't really help matters, trying to create a square, because you'll play d takes c6, which still takes away this one, and bishop takes f5 is coming next turn, with black having a substantial advantage, with white having no development. And so after e4, white's best bet is to go queen to e2, trying to pin this pawn to save their knight. And if you just play something like knight f6 or d5, this is actually certainly a mistake, because after d3, white can really attack this pawn and potentially even try to go up 2 pawns. So that's not what you want. What you want is to play queen to e7, defending the pawn and breaking the pin, and again telling this knight to move because it still has no squares. In this position, white is a little better off taking on c6, because d takes c6 does not take away the d4 square, and so for that reason, b takes c6 is actually a slightly better choice, that white's knight can jump to the one square, and also threaten queen to h5 check, because there's no g6 with the pawn here, so you gotta always watch out for that diagonal. F5, I mean, we're gonna be talking a lot about f5, but yeah, it's gonna open 2 pretty dangerous diagonals onto your king that black is gonna have to deal with. So it is like certainly an unprincipled move to kind of play that early into the opening, and I'm really excited to get to the super interesting lines that I'm sure Praggnanandhaa had prepared. Sorry to reveal his prep if I do. I have no idea. But yes, here after just knight to f6, black is doing excellently. d5, c5, queen e5, all these moves are coming. They should have no issue getting this pawn back a couple different ways. And like I was saying, if you played a6 first and then bishop to a4, after f5 in this position, pawn takes f5, I think it is pretty much the exact same deal with knight to d4. There's really no big difference of the pawn being on a7 or a6 in this position. There is a big difference in a couple of the other lines, which to get to first. Okay, the other thing I'll get to before getting to the so-called refutation of the Schliemann in this position and comparing it to the position on the board, I'd like to get to bishop takes c6 first. D takes c6. This is another bad move for white. Again, it doesn't matter whether the pawn's on a7 or a6. This will be the last time when that doesn't matter. But this situation, with everything hanging in the center, and in spite of white being much closer to castling than is black, the issue is white has no queenside development, and for that reason, nothing's working for them here. So if they go knight takes e5, you have the classic Ruy Lopez trick of just going queen d4, as if your pawn was still here. But after queen d4 in this position, the trick is that you're actually defending your rook. So, like, well, if this knight just moves, you can just eat this pawn with a phenomenal bishop pair. And if queen to h5 check, you can play g6, because this trick that you think works all the time doesn't work. You have your rook defended, and this check doesn't do anything when you don't have any pieces other than your queen to attack with. So it's kind of funny with the queen's defense that way. Really saves the day for black in this line. Similarly, castles looks like it should work for white, because they've done the right thing. They've gotten castled, and our king's just in the middle. But after knight takes e5, you can play the same line, queen d4. No good way to defend the knight. There's no f4, it's pinned. There's no d4, obviously. And queen to h5 check is not a good move, because the rook is defended, which is kind of incredible. And after takes here, white really just has nothing. And it's actually black who's going to be much better developed than is white. Kind of an interesting position there. So yes, everything's working for black in these lines. Takes c6, not a good move, regardless of whether the pawn's on a7 or a6. Okay, so why isn't the Schliemann Gambit just totally OP? Why don't we see it at the top level? Well, there's 3 moves that now we need to talk about that are going to be very important. There is knight to c3, there is d3, and there is d4, which we're going to talk about last, because that is the move Vidit played in the game, and we're going to show the game after this, which is also really, really exciting, and I'm just so impressed by this game by Pragg for a number of reasons, not just the opening choice. So let's first talk about knight c3. And to better understand knight c3, we have to talk about knight c3 in this position, because this is considered actually to be the refutation to the Schliemann Gambit. And why did Vidit not choose it in this position? What is the big difference? And it's probably not what you think. So knight c3 in this position, black must play pawn takes e4, because at this moment, if you just play knight to f6 and try to keep this tension, white can now take it, because after e4, you've blocked control of this diagonal. So in this position, white can play knight to g5, just attacking e4, d5. This looks like it could work out for black, actually. They took a big center, and if they could just get in bishop takes f5, then they could make this knight move. Everything would be great for them, but white here can play very, very quickly. They can play d3, trying to chip away at this pawn. This is not something you want to take, because after takes in any way, f5 gets defended, and then this knight has like the square and everything. So d3, you take this pawn, and now after trade, and queen to e2, they keep attacking this, and it's really just impossible to deal with for black, because so you keep trying to protect this pawn. They play bishop to d2, breaking this pin, but now after castles, you're in a really, really tough situation where any capture here actually will work out for them because of the nifty little trick of recapturing back on d2. And with this bishop being under attack in a lot of these lines, things don't really work out for white here. I think I got this one position right. Yeah, this should be. Yeah, this is +2, because after takes, best move is bishop c4, which is kind of nasty. You're blocking castling both ways and blocking the queen this way. So this bishop is just dead in the water after queen to e7, rook to e1. Sheesh, kind of brutal. Moved, and then this queen can move. Hit that queen that way. So yeah, tough situation for black. They cannot get out of the center quite fast enough if they play this with knight to f6. Okay, so knight to c3, it's a very good move, but it looks like it shouldn't be, because why are you defending this with the knight? Takes, and now shouldn't I just be able to play d5? If you just retreat with your knight, then yes, you're absolutely right. After just bishop to g4, we have a really, really nice center. Bishop to g4 protects the pawn. Yeah, right, this was pinned, so this was under attack. But now here, like, everything's beautiful for black. They got a great center. If you're able to trade the f-pawn for the e-pawn, that is always a success for black in these lines, right? If you can just take the center like that, beautiful trade. But in this position, after d5, white has the very sharp line, knight takes e5, and this launches a very sharp, all-forced line in the Schliemann Gambit. I'll just show you the best moves of this quickly, because it's very, very interesting. So we take the knight, they take here. And now we're not able to just recapture, because after takes, bishop to d7, they actually don't take here immediately, but throw in this crazy move, queen to h5 check. If you play g6 now, then both rooks you have hanging. So this just doesn't end well for black. You have to play king to e7, and this still ends poorly. So you can't take back immediately. What you can try is this nice move, queen to g5, attacking the bishop and attacking this pawn. Right? So now if like the knight retreats, you can play c6, and things might work out for you a little bit, although this is still kind of a very weird line. I'll just show you guys the best move. So it's with queen to e2, and the point of queen to e2 is that you cannot take here, because still you can give this check, and after queen to e5, you'll be checkmating black with knight to d8, with a series of very, very interesting moves here. Takes, this is check this way. So kind of really, really interesting stuff. So queen to e2, it defends the bishop this way. So if you're black, you can play here knight to f6, protecting your pawn and protecting against queen to h5 check. You're still trying to take g2. You're trying to take c6, but the recapture will fork your rook and your king. But so if you're white, what you want to do is you can take a7 to try to trade that knight off, to try to really go up that piece, right? Because you are up a piece at this exact moment. So black will play bishop to d7, take, f4. Very important inclusion here to play f4. If you're white, if you just come back knight to b5, then they can take g2. So what you should play is f4, a nice tempo to make this defense. Queen to h4 check doesn't really change anything. And now once this goes back, you can play your knight b5, and somehow you've won a pawn if you're white. So this is somehow the most, the top engine line, and it has been played actually a handful of times. But yeah, actually, if you keep following the main line of the Schliemann from that position, you'll get to a position that looks a lot like that. So kind of interesting stuff, but your opponent might be well prepared for this. And knight to c3 is working out for them, because in this line, they do have this move, knight takes e5, and it does work for them. So why doesn't that exact line also work out for white after a6, bishop to a4, main Ruy Lopez stuff not incoming of here, bishop e7, castles, d6, b5, right? All this not happening. Instead, we play f5, and if knight to c3, what you can do, it looks like there should be two reasons why knight to c3 actually is bad. I have news for you. You're wrong on both of them. You're probably wrong on both of them. At least I was. I thought this had no chance of working, because of b5 we could play, and after bishop to b3, here are the two reasons why I thought this position is bad for white. Reason number one, I thought we would play here b4, knight moves, and we take this. This knight has nowhere to go. It would go back here, and after knight to f6, I'm up a pawn, and I'm up everything, right? White had to go back knight to g1. The other reason was I thought I could take here, takes, and just go d5. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to take the whole center, just like this. Tempo on the knight, what can be better? You're retreating, I'm playing knight to f6, I'm bringing everything out, and everything is beautiful for me with my big center. Neither of those reasons work, because white has a phenomenal piece sacrifice in both of those lines. In both of these lines, after b4 and after pawn takes e4, there is a piece sacrifice out of nowhere. It's actually crazy. So this is very, very interesting. So here, if you play b4, knight to d5, pawn takes e4, what could white possibly have in this position? It is the crazy move. They put the Gambit glasses on with d4, just completely ignoring that this knight is hanging, and this position, after takes, this is like literally plus 0.7. This is literally plus 0.7. How is that possible at all? How is it possible at all? Well, first of all, if you just grab this pawn, what they can do is now they can check and they can take e5, because this knight has gone away, right? So takes and your rook is hanging. What if we just hang out? We just play bishop to e7. The issue here is that this bishop is so good. We've chased it to b3 with a6 and b5, and now it is scorching down this diagonal. So we like to keep it in a spot of limbo on a4 where it's not, where we can play b5 at any moment to take it away from this diagonal and potentially getting rid of our knight, but we don't want to yet put it on b3 where it can cause mate threats. So here with knight takes c7, takes, and queen to f7, king d8, the issue here with that bishop support is that they're threatening the rook, and we cannot play bishop to f6 without getting checkmated. So here white is winning for that reason, which is kind of very interesting stuff. If you knight to f6 is an interesting try here, but after takes, knight takes doesn't work because this is check and you'll lose your rook. So you can have to take, bishop takes d5. Somehow here, like this king just cannot get out of the middle. It just cannot get out of the middle. You can barely avoid checkmate here, but the issue is now white can actually even take back their piece because the rook is hanging here. So we're just kind of stuck on the back rank here with this bishop really causing a lot of problems down here, coupled with the queen, coupled with that strong knight. So d4 is a masterful piece sacrifice that white has. And remember, we're talking about the highest level of chess here. So all this stuff is available, if not in preparation, stuff I'm sure they would find over the board. And similarly here with pawn takes e4, right? We're just like, okay, can I at least get you to just take back, and then I'll play d5. In the other line, remember, that bishop was on b5 with this pin, and our pawns were just back here, and they had knight takes e5, which shouldn't be the case in this position, right? However, it is the case in this position. White here can play knight takes e5, sacrificing like this. Very, very, very good resource. What the issue is, if we take back, check, hits the knight, gotta save the knight, knight to g6, but queen to d5, we've exposed the rook, which has come up a couple of times and is going to keep coming up. When you play f5, when you play b5, when your king's still in the middle, yeah, these problems can happen. Checkmate here, sorry, not there, here, and your rook's hanging here, and it's really just that simple. Sometimes it really is just that simple. You protect mate, you're going to lose your rook, and this is hanging as well. Not good. You're not developed. So you cannot play like that, so you must be so precise. But this is where, like, the preparation advantage is huge, because these lines are so hard to come up with over the board. What you can play instead is takes e4 first. If we take e4 first, this is going to work out for us. There's no knight takes e5 in this position. It's not even close to working, because they need b5 and bishop to b3 in for them to have any threat in this position, right? This queen is actually making exactly 0 threats, and they're just down a piece after just something simple like knight out. So after takes e4, they have no choice but to play knight takes e4. Now we play b5, chase the bishop here. This is the position we wanted. We can play d5 now. There's no knight takes e5 in this position. It's almost a little close to working, knight takes e5, but what we can do is just take back, check knight g6, bishop takes d5. This is a good idea with now the queen having this defense, and this is causing a few problems this way and that. And if you were to just play rook to b8 here, this would actually be not a good situation for black, because they're so far from castling. The best line is with bishop to g4. This is an important resource. Bishop to g4. Let me just turn this engine off because this is lagging a little bit. Hitting the queen. So now this trade is everything black wants. Bishop to c6, bishop to d7. This is also playable for black, and just take like this. Queen is operating nicely. This knight will be chased out, and black will be able to develop safe and sound. So no sacrifice there, which means that this knight really just has to retreat. And after something simple like knight to f6, black is doing great. There's a couple more lines I can show here, but something like castles, bishop to e7, they're doing very nice. White needs this punch d4. But all you have to do if you're black is really just trade everything. And this is a theme that you'll see come up a couple times. Defend this pawn, and now all of a sudden, if white were to castle, c5 and c4 is going to trap this bishop. All right, so just check, just queen e7, and these pawns are great. c4 is coming, and you can trap this bishop. So that's something that white needs to be very concerned about. But yeah, otherwise, if they don't play d4, these pawns are just monsters. And knight to g3 was not a good move either. E4 is actually the best line here. Again, forcing the knight just back to g1. It doesn't have access to any of these squares due to the knight and the queen. So yeah, not a good situation for white if their bishop is on a4, because if you time this with the exact right move order, what we're able to do is to get everything we wanted, right? In this line with knight to c3 like this, they were able to have this knight takes e5 line. But we're able to have this exact position, but chasing the bishop to b3 with a6 and b5. So that is a massive difference, and otherwise it would make no sense for them to put a knight here. It would make more sense for them to put a pawn there, such as with this move d3. So let's talk about d3 in this position, which is a very simple move, and it's actually what I recommend to all my viewers and what I play myself against almost any hits with f5. So like, for example, if you're facing like a Vienna here, like especially if you're like a Bush Gas player and you face f4 at any moment, just play d6, right? Just play d6 is my advice. Don't take it. Don't give them the whole center and everything that they want. Just play d6, hold this here, and then make them pay for having this diagonal open, right? Just hold your center, and then don't let them castle with this diagonal, and then try to bother them on the other diagonals if you can while you've kept their king in the middle. So that is a very simple algorithm for just dealing with these sorts of things. And so why isn't that a good option for white in this position with pawn to d3? So this is another very subtle yet very important moment, because it has to do with this bishop, and it has to do with whether this bishop can hold this diagonal cutting off black's castle. In this line, all black needs to do is trade, knight to f6, castles, and play this simple move pawn to d6 to hold on to e5. After something just like knight to c3 and bishop to e7, white's issue is that if their bishop were on b5, they could play bishop to c4 and cut this castle forever. However, in this position, there is no bishop to b3 because of knight to a5, and I can take that bishop. If white had this position, right, of let's say this were somehow on c4, and I play knight to a5, it's an okay move, but this bishop can just really drop back, and this knight can, continue to be chased. So it's not really the best of options. So it makes a big difference at this level, certainly, that you can play knight to a5, and this bishop has nowhere to go, and you can just trade off for it. So it's not even actually a good move at all. What white should do is probably queen d3 maybe to get out of the way of this pin, but after something like castles, black has total equality and actually a really, really nice game. They were able to play f5 and achieve this pawn trade of this f-pawn for this d-pawn, which does a few things for them. They're able to play queen to e8, maybe to g6 to h5. They got this file going. This bishop can come to e6 or to g4. This check just doesn't do anything. And yeah, these things can come out really, really nicely. And I think, honestly, black here can have a really nice game attacking a number of targets here. And it's not really so obvious to me what white's play is. So this position is really just completely equal because black was able to chase this bishop to a4 where it doesn't have the same rope. There's a big difference between it being on c4 and it being on b3 in terms of cutting off the castling this way, right? One gives the knight a5 option where we can just trade on b3, and the other, if you're playing knight a5 and the bishop moves away, the knight is looking really, really stupid on the edge of the board. So that is the important difference here. And so with this option of including a6 and bishop to a4, we're not able to be stopped from castling so easily. A few of you guys might know this gambit actually in the mainline Schliemann. So with d3, if you play f5 without a6, so the non-deferred Schliemann, right, mainline, takes, knight to f6, castles, you don't really have the same option of d6. I'll put this on the board here, d6. White here can immediately play bishop to c4 even, right, because takes, queen d5, this is going to end very badly for you with lots of mate threats. Your light scores aren't looking good. But yeah, this position stinks. This position really stinks. Like, what are you going to do to get your king out of the middle? Yeah, knight to a5, check. Not really the best situation. Knight to a5 is actually the top engine move in this position. But, yeah, it can be really tough if that diagonal is blocking you. Is knight c3 the best line? This position's even worse. You can't even get this position. There's knight to g5 right away if they're able to bring their bishop right back to c4. So that's an interesting point. If they play bishop to c4 right now, you're in really hot water. You got to be very, very precise because knight to g5 is actually an immediate threat of punishing you on f7 right away. So much, much better for them to never have that option of bishop to b3 and just being able to play knight a5 at any moment you need, in case that were to happen. So in this position, the main line is with bishop to c5, and black would achieve everything they wanted unless white here grabs a pawn for their trouble. So takes, and knight takes e5. There is not going to be a knight takes e4 option because at minimum there's queen to h5 check and all sorts of problems. Remember, when you move your f-pawn, there's two diagonals. There's this one and there's this one. And this one's going to be a special problem if your opponent can establish control over the g6 square. So after queen to h5, g6, here black is losing. Black here needs to play castles. Knight to c3 now to protect the pawn. And here black can actually play d6 to chase this knight away. If knight takes c6, there's queen to e8, attacking this knight and getting back at least one pawn. Not the best option. Better is knight to e3 with tempo on this bishop, and bishop to d4 in this position is some sort of established theory for Schliemann players. Black has a little bit of compensation. They have a bishop pair for the pawn, but white generally should be fine. They have no obvious weaknesses in their position, and I mean, there's a lot of fun black can have here, especially as a Gambit player myself. I would be very remiss to dismiss this or anything like that, but not like it's not new ground by any means, and it's not like super scary for white, but it's certainly fun to play. So this is not what Pragg was going for, though. He does not give that option because you have a better option, which when you include a6 early, right? And I'll note the difference. Like you can never just transpose. Like you can't just play a6 now because you feel like it. One, takes c6 and takes e5 could be an issue, but the other is like once you've played f5, this bishop's going to want to be here. going to want to be here. It's going to want to be causing problems this way, stopping you from castling and making checkmate threats. Right? You play knight f6, they can just knock you out with knight g5 and walking right into f7. So you can't just do it the same way. So, yes, if you are a white player facing a regular Schliemann, I do recommend to play d3 because you do have another option in addition to just kind of grabbing this pawn with take c6, but you do have this move bishop to c4, as we talked about, cutting the castling just in time. Knight takes e4 is not working because of queen to d5, threatening way too many things. So after bishop to c4, black here should play d6, and after just knight c3, something like bishop to g4, h3, here white is doing quite well because of cutting this castling. And there is actually one interesting, this is a very, very interesting queen sacrifice out of nowhere that I wanted to share with you guys, because if black actually keeps following the most common and natural moves, so they played here bishop to g4, bishop to h5, so they're probably planning on castling long because of the bishop blocking you. Remember, this is the standard Schliemann without a6. So after bishop to h5 here, bishop to g5, and knight to d4 looks very appealing. It creates this pin, putting a lot of pressure on the f3 knight. And yes, not queen to d7, because what you can do is actually remove this knight, which was protecting this bishop, and now knight takes e5. So they're actually threatening to take this and threatening to take this, and this is working out actually very nicely for white. So you can't play like this. What you can try is knight to d4, which makes a lot more sense. Only what white can do is they can sacrifice the queen with knight takes. So really, really interesting stuff. If you just play pawn takes, you do have this defended against this. So that looks like it might be okay. But white is doing fine after bishop to e2. If takes, they can take this. And if takes here, knight takes e2, and white is doing very, very well. So what black should do is grab the queen. The point for white is that they can actually jump in knight to e6, and this knight is now causing a lot of problems deep into enemy territory, just chilling on e6. So a number of lines. The best move according to the engine is actually bishop to e2, just trying to redirect one of these pieces from their aggressive posts. I'll note this is like a plus 0.7 position. If queen to e7, there's so many fun lines here. Knight to d5 is just one of them. Loving how the knights operate, both targeting c7, threatening this fork. And all these pieces, I mean, because this is giving this pin, so this is just a tough situation. What you can do if you're black is just sacrifice back the queen. And so this is kind of the optimal way for both sides to play. You end up in some interesting position like this, where this pawn is hanging. So knight to d5 is a nice move here. Queen to d7, this just really showcases the power of this position. Because after rook takes d1, white is just completely winning, even though they have only 2 pieces for the queen. But it just goes to show how strong this knight is, just cutting castling in both directions. There's no way to really make that move, and you are threatening knight takes c5 to just win another piece with this pin happening. But after bishop to b6, all you need to do is take away maybe black's last useful piece, takes, and rook to d3. Literally just like the rook is coming around, and it's very, very hard to recommend any good moves for black. And this position is, yeah, plus 1.6. It actually just keeps climbing up and up and up. So pretty interesting piece sacrifice. So if you are facing the regular Schliemann and want something new to play, especially against Schliemann players who are prepared, I've discovered something that's kind of simple to play, and that you also have that piece sacrifice option. So if bishop to c5 here, just bring that bishop back at the first opportunity to stop them from castling. Odds are d6, knight c3, probably bishop to g4, and you can maybe get them with this interesting queen sacrifice if they go for what is probably the most obvious thing to play. It's really hard to recommend something else for black to do, and if they do give you a chance to play a3 and tuck that bishop back into a2 in case of any knight a5, yeah, this bishop is a huge, huge problem and is going to force black to try to find a way to castle along somehow. And if not, I don't know, try and get them on f7. So that would be my recommendation there, but it's not something you can do against a6. So what to do against a6? Because currently we're seeing knight c3 is a worse version, because after knight takes e4, they're able to play b5 and then d5 and just hit this without having the knight takes e5 option. And d3, we're also not able to get nearly as good of a version because the bishop is here. Here's what you do get a better version of with the pawn on a6 and the bishop on a4. You get a better version of this d4 line. Some of you might know the d4 line from the regular Schliemann with f5, d4, and it's considered to be not the best for this reason. Black can play pawn takes e4, attacking the knight. White takes here, takes, and here black has this very, very important move. Black's position would be absolutely awful without this move, because this bishop is going to cut back to this diagonal. It's going to stop you from castling. White's about to castle, and this pawn's going to fall. Like, everything looks bad, unless they have this one very important move. It is c6. The point of c6 is that any movement of this bishop, let's say to this diagonal of death, there's check. White blocks somehow. You take this pawn. That's the pawn stopping you from en passant. Diagonal of death is now no more after d5. It is now pawn chain of solidness. So all good for black in this position. However, white has this interesting piece sacrifice that you might know about. It is with this move knight to c3. Offering this bishop takes and knight takes e4. So you just offer this bishop right there, and now black it's kind of an interesting position. It's not easy to play if you're black, because this is gonna castle. Knight to d6 check is gonna come, pawn takes, and then this rook can come to e1. For example, like if you really don't know what you're doing, let's say you go here, here. It's hard to recommend something for black. Honestly, maybe b6 coming out this way. Let's say rook to e1 here, and something like knight to d6 check and pawn takes d6, and you know, you can get like checkmated like this somehow, right? So not fun. Not fun situation. That certainly wasn't the best line. Yeah, I mean, also after b6, this is kind of a brutal move, right? So the best line in this position, if you're black, is to play d5 to try and sacrifice back some material right away. So after that en passant, you have a little bit of breathing room after knight to f6. And continuing to follow the most common moves, or the top engine moves at least, is kind of interesting. Engine recommends you let this knight go if you're white. Check, g6, check. So you're getting that back. Actually, you can get the rook back. This knight now comes back to box the queen in a little bit, out this way and out this way. So here, white should play bishop to h6 using this pin to try to fight their way out. And very, very interesting position, bishop to f5. Everything can trade off here. And black will now have a couple pieces for a rook and 2 or 3 pawns. So that is a line. That's an option, this piece sacrifice, but it's considered to be like pretty good for black because of that move c6, although white has an interesting piece sacrifice that they can try to play. You'll note, you might already start to realize that that is not really on the table for black in this position. With d4, if you now play pawn takes e4, takes, or like, oh yeah, let me go c6 here so I can attack your bishop and go queen to a5 check next. Oops, c6 does nothing. And white here would just castle and laugh in your face. So this position sucks for black. You can play your b5, but then you've just redirected this bishop to the diagonal of death, and queen to d5 might couple a couple painful diagonals. I don't know why I'm speaking so weird today. So d4 was chosen in the game for that exact reason. Black here does not have the option of pawn takes e4. So this is what Vidit played in the game. I think we've done a very good overview of the Schliemann, of the deferred Schliemann, and of the important contrast between them, and why Vidit chose d4 here rather than d3 or knight c3, because in those lines, this bishop is placed a little misplaced in both of those options. So after d4, Pragg chose pawn takes d4. And so here it looks like white has a few options, but white really only has one option. If you take on f5, the problem is now after queen to e7 check, you really have no good way to deal with this. Your king's going to move, or queen to e2, trade. And a queen trade is actually great for black. I mean, certainly a queen trade like this is great for black because the king is a little bit awkward. But they have no king safety issues to worry about. So they'll chase this bishop away, they'll take this, and they're going to be very, very happy. Whereas otherwise, they should have some king safety issues to worry about. They just open the center, and they're very, very far from castling compared to white. Knight takes d4 is also not a great option, and it has to do with a theme that we touched on and that we're definitely going to come back to again, which is this bishop potentially getting trapped. If black trades everything here and plays c5, you have a very secret threat of, now if this queen just kind of retreats or something, b5 and c4, which traps this bishop. So what white should do is queen to e5, but again, the queen trade can be forced. You can't take on f5 without your bishop getting trapped with b5 and c4, so you'll actually just be losing this pawn. So this kind of sucks for white as well. So they can't take on d4 for that reason. What he can do is play this move e5, splitting the pawns. So this you guys might recognize from like the Falkbearer Gambit. Let's like put that on the board. So e here, f4. There's the counter gambit to the King's Gambit that is quite common, where you can play d5, takes, and kind of split those pawns. Just push e4, try to have a strong pawn there that gets in the way of your opponent's development maybe a little bit. It kind of makes these moves maybe a little bit more difficult to play, and hopefully you can just collect this one soon enough. Although, I mean, in that position there's a lot of theory, but just to show the motif. So a6, here, f5, d4 takes, and e5 tries to split those pawns. And here, with a lot of tension coming here and here, Pragg plays b5 to free this knight, and will immediately go after this bishop. Will immediately go after this bishop because he knows how dangerous this can be on this diagonal. Very, very important option. Bishop to d5 is not an option. There's c6, and the trade will be happening. There's no way for this bishop to stay on the board and continue to cause pain down this diagonal. And if he did leave it a couple moves, yeah, there's problems on f7, and there's problems not being able to castle like that for so long. You don't want that on the board. There. So knight to a5, and it does one other thing, which is that you don't have to take it right away unless it can escape being traded. Like if you play pawn to a3, okay, you have to take it, because then it would be threatening bishop to a2. But there's another thing it does, which is introduce the idea of c5, which could maybe attack something here, and then c4. Right? So he's putting that on the table as well, and knight to a5 is not really a move you can play unless you're very, very well prepared. Because it's so dangerous to do with nothing developed at all. You're moving the one piece that is developed again, and your king's in the middle, and your opponent's king is about to not be in the middle. So you have to really, really know what you're doing. Okay, queen takes d4 is kind of an option, but it's very understandable why you wouldn't play that, because it really invites the idea of c5 and c4. It doesn't work right away, because queen d5 here threatens a couple things. But after something like bishop to b7, now c5 and c4 is an option again, and white would have to know kind of a lot of theory here. This is interesting, like bishop to d5, trying to keep that on the board, c6, and bishop takes g8. Just trying to cause problems if you're white, and leave your opponent's piece is kind of awkward. But queen takes d4 is not chosen by Vidit. He chose this interesting move, knight takes d4. So knight takes d4 makes a lot of sense, and bishop to b7 was played by Pragg instantly, and Vidit again thought for a while. Vidit eventually played knight takes f5, which you can't really fault him for. But the better option would probably be, and I'd like to show you this Duda game against Duda-Tari, where Duda played white and was probably also equally surprised by this line, because I actually checked the timestamps and he was thinking during this game. So he played here castles. The point being that after c5, takes in c4. So it's, okay, you are losing a piece, right? So like, you'd play castles right away, especially to guard g2. I mean, unless there was some very good reason why not to. And yeah, this is the very good reason why not to. c5, c4, and your bishop is trapped. Okay, what to do here? The point of this line is that you can play here knight to c3, and this was Duda's game against Duda-Tari, who was playing black. Knight to c3, and you can't really take this bishop so easily, and it's not obvious why. Here's the reason. If you take it, after a takes b3, there's a lot of pressure on this knight. If you come back knight to c6 right away, then you give up this square, and a knight drops into d6 and pretty much ends the game on you. Right? You're so behind in development. What you should try instead is maybe queen to b6 to try to escape this way. But the issue you're going to have here is that after something like rook to e1, again, you can't bring this knight back because now knight d5 is really brutal with the bishop being blocked here. So there's this rook pressuring this knight, but the knight cannot jump back into the game. But the other issue you're facing is that the queen could run out of squares. So even if something like castles, what can happen here is like knight check, takes, and now after bishop to e3, this last square for the queen to guard the knight is taken away. Or they can even do it the other way. With bishop to e3, hitting the queen rather, queen needs to defend this knight, check, takes, and you can actually even run out of squares. So that's how bad black's position is that they can't even really like hang on to this knight due to the overwhelming pressure that white is exerting right here. So this is a tough situation for Duda-Tari, and he plays this good move, queen to b6. So he's like, okay, I'll get out of the center as fast as I can. Hopefully I'll be able to take this bishop at an opportune moment, right? If a3 to try and save this, then okay, you can take it and there's no rook pressure here, right? So the queen is kind of more free if she gets attacked. So that's not what happened. Instead, Duda kept his foot on the gas with this move knight to d5, hitting the queen, forcing queen takes, hitting the rook, and now queen to c6. So takes actually was a mistake. I will note the evaluation jumps from plus 0.1 to plus 1.3. And it's very, very difficult to play this move queen to c6, knowing that you need to defend this knight after takes. But queen to c6, it causes some issues this way, but like leaving these in your face, I totally understand why you might not want to do that. It's a very, very understandable mistake, but this is kind of the idea that Duda sees the initiative, right? He's offering to sacrifice back material. He has a couple pawns he should have for this piece at minimum. But he's the one causing all the problems for his opponent. He's the one putting his opponent in a position where they can mess up. He's the one making the threats. And mess up they did, because everyone is human, even players at this level. So takes queen c6, trying to trade queens, which makes a lot of sense if your king's unsafe to protect this rook. Duda says no and chooses a great square, queen to d4, and it is at this point that black is now never going to be able to take this bishop, because the issue now is e6, threatening knight takes g7 check, and issues with this rook being dead after e6. So not a fun situation for black there. So Tari needs to play queen to e6, stopping this pawn, but there's a way to get around that. It is with knight to d6 check, takes pawn takes. Threatening here, okay, knight to f6, what else can you do? Still can't take this. Now here's the point of this combination. Queen to c3. Queen to c3, one move before they're able to castle, you're able to attack this knight. Here's the key. Now if you drop the knight back, there's a rook to e1. With the queen dropping back here, covering the e1 square just before this king got off of the e-file. Queen to c3, and at this point it forces Tari to have no choice but to castle to save his own skin. Takes here. Okay, eventually he will recapture this bishop on b3, only he's 2 pawns down. He never got a piece ahead. He got his king to safety, but he was never able to capture that bishop cleanly because of the issues on his king. And for that reason, this is just completely lost, actually, and was kind of nice technique by Mr. Duda, keeping all the pawns on the board. Played f3. That was a weakness here. Rook f to c1, keeping the rook active over here, and also the option of playing king to f1, bringing that king into the game, just trading everything off, and rook to e1. Can't take c2 because of this, and now just trading off all the rooks 2 pawns ahead, and Tari resigns. So this is at Norway Chess. This is at Norway Chess from 2020. So this is a pretty important game that Tari tried playing this very interesting line, made really just one mistake. Really just one mistake, and that is with bishop takes d5. So it's really, really tough to play these positions when your opponent is actually the one sacrificing material. And from a practical point of view, I do think that's what Vidit should have done. It should have played a little bit like Duda in this game, just castles instead of pawn fishing. But he didn't want his bishop to be trapped with c5, c4, so he takes on f5 right away to take this option off the board. Okay, here's the game. Pragg continues with knight takes b3. There's now no c5, c4 happening, right? There's nothing really to attack. c5 wouldn't be a good move for that reason. So he's just taking this dangerous bishop off the board. A takes b3. And now what? So he's actually down a pawn in this position. Bishop takes g2 is not an option, because after something simple like rook to g1, you'll lose this pawn on g7, which is much more important. That pawn was the one that could stop queen to h5 check. And if that pawn's not there, you might be in a lot of trouble after queen to h5 check. So that's not an option. The point here, and also g6, I'll note, is also not an option, because like I said, this is not, this does not work out for you. Something like this, you'll lose your queen, right? So you need that g pawn to stop queen to h5 check. So g6 doesn't do anything. d6 was played, which is a very interesting move, and it is here Vidit again thinks for a long, long time. Tough position for him. If he plays pawn takes d6, what Pragg is planning is queen to d7. He's trying to make this knight move, play bishop takes d6, castle, and then get these really nice bishops along this diagonal. What the best try is queen to h5 check, g6, and queen back to e2 check. So there's nothing really that can block this. g6 was an interesting provocation. You can just play it with queen to e2 right away. King to f7 is the point. Knight comes back to e3, and bishop takes e6. So there was nothing to block this. And so he's played king f7, he's down a pawn, castles. This is a playable position for both sides. However, this is probably exactly what Pragg wanted, and it's probably what Vidit was realizing during the game. Beautiful bishops, like I was just saying. Knight can come to f6, rooks come to nice open files, and the knight on e3 is solid. It holds g2, but there's a lot of play here for black. Black's bishops here look good, and I think this is pretty much full compensation for the pawn. So this was an option for Vidit, but understandably he did not want to go for this, accepting this other pawn right here. So queen to d7, and the willingness to just play king to f7, just understanding that white has no pieces out. You are the one with pieces out. You're the one controlling the squares on the board that could bother you. Here, c4, f3. So this is, I mean, it's still preparation, of course, for Pragg, but very, very interesting preparation, of course, is kind of my point. Castles was still an option. Castles was still an option, but again, it was kind of equality, because at this moment, Pragg would get his pawn back, and there's something that Vidit has better than really just kind of allowing this queen trade and knight to f6. And again, this is equality, a different kind of equality. not what he wanted. He wanted to go for a little bit more. So he played this move queen to e2. So now you can't just take this pawn because queen takes e5 check and g7 is hanging. So queen to e2, taking advantage of the fact that, yeah, he's up a pawn and also trying to cause problems against this king. So queen to d7 offers a transposition, right? It offers takes d6, king to f7, and kind of the same position we were looking at, trying to make that knight move, and bishop takes d6, after which he'd be very happy. He took a different option, Vidit did, playing this move pawn to e6. So pawn to e6, now trying to have a very, very strong extra pawn in his opponent's territory. Pragg says okay, brings his queen all the way to c6, and is now forming a strong battery here. At this moment, Vidit again thinks for a long time and plays bishop to g5, which is an interesting choice. I think he would have been a lot better off playing just this move f3. f3 just against this, and now he just never has to worry about it again, because this diagonal would cause him a lot of problems in the game. But just playing f3, you don't have to worry about it. To me, makes a lot of sense. Bishop to g5 is a bit of a interesting move. The point is queen takes g2 cannot be played. Not that anyone thought Pragg would fall for this, but there's knight takes g7 check, only move takes. Queen to h5, you're actually blocking the queen from coming back, as well as, of course, controlling these squares, and there's checkmate here. So that was the threat with bishop to g5. Of course, Pragg sees this and plays this move pawn to g6, chasing the knight away. It comes back to e3, defending g2. So this is Vidit's idea. He's going to play bishop to g5, and he's going to get the knight to e3, with his bishop already developed on the other side of that knight. So a bit of a clever idea. However, the bishop here can run into a little bit of annoyance here. So h6 happens, bishop to h4. This is not really something you'll be able to hold. Not g5 right away because queen h5, but really just something like bishop e7 or knight to e7, and he'll still be able to castle along here. So bishop to f4 was chosen, knight to e7 played anyway. So we have kind of, things are settling down a little bit. Black has the bishop pair and an interesting pawn structure. White is still a pawn ahead. However, it's not really a great pawn to be ahead. And at this point, the position's more or less equal. Engine is giving black a slight pull here at minus 0.3. Because if you're able to eliminate this pawn, you do have a bishop pair, and you do have nice files for your rooks and everything to work with. But yeah, this diagonal, very, very strong. Light square bishop, your opponent doesn't have their light square bishop. So c4 played here, trying to create some pawn trades where black's king would castle. Pragg, of course, says, no, I do not want to open things up there. b4 is also going to take away a nice development square for my opponent's knight. But this gives Vidit another idea, which is queen to g4 and putting the knight on d5. If you can put the knight on d5 and trade off here, maybe you can play e7, check, and try to get something going with that pawn. So queen g4 is a good idea. So queen to c5 was played before castles, because if you castle now, there's knight to d5, takes, if you don't have the bishop helping here, right, takes, this ends badly for you, this is check. So you cannot play like this. Instead, Pragg correctly puts his queen on c5 first, so now knight to d5 you can take with the bishop, and never have to move this knight. Castles. Bishop to g7, included before castling, knight to d2, finishing development, and castles. Here, h4 was played by Vidit, trying to stop g5 and h5 in this pawn expansion a little bit. It's a bit of an awkward move. He would have been best off just going for knight d5 anyway. And once he doesn't do it here, it becomes too late. So immediately after castling, knight d5 is a good idea because both these pieces are actually hard to use. If you use the bishop, you are actually making that pawn unprotected. You do have that open a file, and that is something that Vidit should have used, trying to trade off for this very strong bishop at almost all costs. So if knight takes d5, there is e7 check, which is now very, very kind of powerful to throw in here. C takes d5, you can now really support this pawn. This knight is no longer on e7, it's no longer guarding g6. So getting rid of that knight would have been something very good and getting this pawn rolling. Bishop takes d5, similarly, you can play takes d5, and a6 is hanging. So kind of you're really causing problems to your opponent's position. But what he does when he plays h4, he gives Pragg a moment to breathe here with rook de8. Rook d8 really gets in front of this pawn, e7 check is no longer attacking anything, and knight d5 just doesn't have the same power that it does before. e7 really just doesn't do much here. So, yeah, because he got the rook out of the way. So that's not really an option so much, so he plays rook to d1, again, still trying to support knight d5, and at this point Pragg says, okay, I'll just take the pawn. I'll just grab that pawn on b2. Why not? So he has even the score, pawns-wise, but here comes knight to d5. So it's really the only thing White kind of had to play for, because Pragg has done a great job shutting down this whole side of the board where his king Vidit might have thought that king might have been exposed, but it's really not so exposed, and it's actually doing pretty well. So knight to d5, good idea by Vidit. There's really hard to recommend something else to play. So takes, and bishop takes d5, and e7 check. So he's trying to get this rolling. However, again, the rook's on e8, not d8. That makes a big difference here with this check. King b8, bishop to e3, good move, exposing the fourth rank for the queen. Queen to b5, another good move, defending b4, and also keeping an eye on this square that the knight wants to jump into. It does jump there anyway, with knight to c4, attacking this bishop, comes back to c3, bishop to d4. Good idea to trade off for this piece. Rook to g8 was played. You don't want to take this, because rook takes d4. And rook takes d4 would now be trying to get to b4. So for example, like let's say you protect your pawn or something, knight takes d6, and rook takes b4 causes you a lot of trouble. So with bishop to d4, what you do want is you want to make them take, pawn takes c3, and then maybe get some kind of dangerous pass pawn action going over there. So rook g8 makes sense for that reason. However, best for Pragg to maintain most of his advantage is to play rook to h7, just eliminating this pawn. This is not really a pawn you want to take if you're white, because the issue you're going to have is like rook to g8, and this bishop doing a lot of good things, defending g8 and attacking g2. So you're kind of opening up a bit of a dangerous file there if you're white and taking that pawn. So this wasn't really so necessary to defend. Best would be to make sure you eliminate this dangerous pawn very far down the board. He takes this, and queen to d4, trying to get rid of that right away. Similarly, the understanding is you can't take here for kind of the same reason you don't want to take that g-pawn, right? So in this position, bishop comes back to b7, takes e3, takes e7. So dust is cleared a little bit. However, Pragg is still up that one pawn. Knight to a5 is a good move, though, because with knight to a5, what you can do if you're Vidit is you can try to swing that rook here and put a lot of pressure, right? Because they still do have an opening in front of their king. Rook to e5 was played, attacking this knight, and b4 was played. b4 is not a good choice. It's because the thing is, this knight has nothing good to do other than to trade on b7, right? Because now there's no way to get your rook to b4 if you're Vidit. And if there's no way to get your rook to b4, there's really no way to create any problems. So if this knight has nothing better to do than take on b7, it should take on b7 now. Takes, and then maybe something like rook to d4 or rook to a1, something like this, where the rook can shift here, rook can shift here, pressure can be built on a6. You can kind of generate some, yes, you're down a pawn, but there's definitely counterplay you can generate because your opponent's king is a little bit exposed. So this is how he should have played. But with b4, he gives Pragg a very, very good option, and this is a very, very good way to play, and I like this a lot. He plays here g5, using the fact that, oh yeah, there's this random pawn on h4. That can't be good. That can't be good for your safety. Okay, you have to deny this trade if you're Vidit, right? Because takes, rook takes g5. Okay, this opens way too much. h5 played, g4. I'm attacking this pawn again, and by the way, after rook to e1, okay, maybe now you don't want to take because this generates too much play with rook to e7, threatening takes e7, and okay, you still have a knight on a5. You don't want to do that, that's fine. With g5, g4, you're also able to get it to g3. g3, now really threatening to open this file and to coordinate the bishop here, and at this point, you kind of have no choice if you're white. You have to get rid of that bishop, or else you're going to lose on g2. Takes f2, good in-between move, it's check. Takes, queen takes b7, threatening to take g2. Now your king's exposed if you're white. You kind of have to propose a queen trade, and a very smart moment by Pragg. Yes, your opponent's king is exposed. You could play queen to b6 check, king to f1. Not clear what's going on, but it is clear what's going on if you play rook e to g5. Keep these rooks on the board. Don't allow that trade, because after takes, you're up one pawn here, and you're about to go up another pawn with both of these guys hanging. So this was very, very nicely played. You cannot defend everything here if you're Vidit. He plays here g4, takes, and rook to e6. So he's trying. So in the other position, there was rook takes h5, which immediately would have defended h6. So here, okay, maybe you could take h6 and get your own passer, right? Like if they take b4, it takes h6. Okay, you have some pass pawns, I have some pass pawns. Maybe there's a chance. But this is very, very well played by Pragg here. He plays rook to h4, rook takes h6, and rook to g5. No chance. You're eliminating that pass pawn. And the other issue is that if you trade here, all I need to do, yes, I might even be able to just win this pawn outright. But even if I just play a5 and make this trade, I know I'm winning with two connected pass pawns in the endgame. So that is the smart thing to do. Just go rook and two connected versus rook. Anything that you can win for sure. So for that reason, Vidit tries to dodge this trade. But king to c8 chases this rook, and rook to e5. You can chase this rook to a square all the way after rook to h5 check, where if there's king to g2, now you can play rook g5, force these rooks off the board, force a5, and force a theoretical win on the board. A rather simple one, especially for their level at that. So for that reason, after rook h to f5 check, white resigned. So a very, very cool game. I like this a lot. And it was kind of interesting because Pragg never had to do like crazy fireworks. In fact, he was the one who ended up going up the pawn after initially gambiting out of the opening. Because it's just so, like, Vidit never made like a blunder or anything. He's too good for that. But it's so hard to know what to do. If you're ever in doubt, I think I kind of showed it, which is what you should do. Just play like Duda played with this move castles, and just, you know, being the one who you want to be the one who gets to put on the gambit classes, right? You want to be the one sacrificing material, trying to put pressure on your opponent. So that's what I would recommend in all this stuff for white. But yeah, just to review, so a6 really doesn't give white any good options to decline, right? Because knight c3, you can play it with takes e4, takes b5, bishop b3, and d5. You do this move order correctly, you can take pretty much the whole center with no resistance. And the d3 option is no longer good because they're never able to cut you this way. You don't have to offer a pawn to sacrifice. You can just put your bishop on e7. You can defend e5 very solidly with d6. You have no obligation to sacrifice a pawn. You can just castle, bring your queen to e8, g6, all this. You can still play with bishop c5 if you want to, but this is probably what I would recommend if you're playing black here. So they have to play this line with d4, and then you'll get something like Pragg or like Tari got. I don't know. But this is just so cool to see this at the top level. I really, really like this candidates tournament. In terms of the opening choices, right? Like, eventually we'll come full circle. Like, there's only so much you can study the same 3-4 lines, like Catalans and Ruiz and Queen's Gambit declines, like whatever else. You can study them so deep, and eventually you get to the point where there's always an advantage at any level, no matter what the engine says, to surprising your opponent. It means so much, and especially in sharp positions, to just making them be a human. Even if they're a very, very good human, they're going to be worse than the engine that they had prepared with. So, shout out to Pragg for playing like this. Great game, great candidates tournament all around, and I hope to be able to review more Gambit content at the top level in the future. I'll link this Lichess study, and let me know if you guys have any questions. But thank you guys so much for watching. Peace out.
William Grave, the Gambit man, takes his seat at the board. e4, e5, knight f3, bishop c5. The Bushcast Gambit on the board. On with the Gambit classes. Hero pawn unlocked.